Nehemiah. Really love this story. I remind myself, it's not like I don't know it, but I remind myself very often when you read stories like this that this is not fiction we're talking about. Right? This isn't some author that aspired to write things that would be entertaining for us and grab our attention, but rather this is history. This is events that happened for real and that we can connect to somehow and draw strength as an example of what Nehemiah did to be the great leader that he was. Nehemiah shows us what it means not to lead by title, but by burden. Right? Not to lead by force, but to lead by faith. And I think what he does is his journey reminds us that the greatest leadership missions very often start when ordinary people allow God to burden their hearts for extraordinary work. Kent, you think we can have some air? Maybe.
You authorize
it. There it is. I'm naturally going to be hot, but it seems a little warm this morning. So imagine hearing that your hometown, a place where you lived, a place where you worshiped, a place where you grew up, has been reduced to rubble. Would you shrug it off, or would your heart break? Would you say that's someone else's problem? Or would you say, here am I, send me? You know, it's interesting. Preparing this, I realized not only is this a crisis that Nehemiah faced, but we have people here with us now who can very easily say this. Our brethren in Ukraine, we have folks here now whose hometowns have been utterly destroyed. And in Nehemiah's time, it's a crisis that tells us about today. It mirrors the brokenness of many families, many churches, and many communities. I believe as we discuss this angle of such about leadership, it's about responding to the brokenness in faith and in action. So today we're going to talk about 5, of Nehemiah's pillars of leadership, okay? We're going to try to draw some lessons from us that help us to maybe increase our skill set as it comes to leadership. First of all, let's talk about Nehemiah's burden and his prayer. This will come from, generally speaking, from Nehemiah chapter 1. So when he hears about Jerusalem's destruction, he doesn't start making phone calls and organizing a protest. The Bible says that he weeps and he fasts and he prays for days. He confesses sins, not just his own, but of his people. And what that shows us is that real leadership begins with compassion, with confession, and with communication with God. Nehemiah chapter 1 and verse 4, reading from the New King James Version. So it was when I heard these words that I sat down and wept and mourned for many days. I was fasting and praying before the God of heaven. So, why do you think Nehemiah's first response was prayer rather than immediate action? Why do you think that happened?
He knew God telling him to do things.
Yeah.
So God was being on his side.
Sir?
So God was being on his side
That's right.
to support him.
Yeah. I think he clearly understood that without God's guidance, that effort would fail, right? And this is really important. Leadership starts with seeking God's will, not rushing into our own human solutions. It doesn't start with action. If you look at his situation, it started with anguish. If I'm not willing to mourn over the broken walls of people's lives, then I'm not ready to rebuild them.
If you look at things that are happening right now, the fact that we don't go to God right now, and we just take action without seeking the right action, we're messing up.
And, Danny, I'll take it a step further. And it's interesting how that we wonder sometimes why it's not working out.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yeah, right? We use that in our spiritual life, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, but many times, if you see an intense struggle that's happening in someone's life, oftentimes, obviously you're not going to talk in absolutes, but oftentimes, if a person does some reflection, they'll realize that this is very much connected to their relationship with God. The exception is those people who can react to it with prayer, with faith, and then action, and then become this great beacon of example to other people around them. How to deal with the difficult circumstances that you find yourself in.
Well, it tells us in Ephesians 6, when we put on the full armor of God, the next thing that we do is pray.
Yeah. Yeah, you remember when we had that study is that it really was never actually listed as one of the elements, one of the weapons of armor, but it clearly is. That prayer has to be so ingrained into our decision-making process, right? It kind of has to lay the groundwork before I get to making the important decisions of my life. There was a story about a man whose name, ironically, is George Mueller, and he built orphanages in England. The story goes that he built those purely on faith and prayer. He never advertised his needs, but prayed them into existence. When God burdened him, this is his words, with the plight of homeless children, he dropped to his knees before he ever laid a single brick. So like Nehemiah, this guy's here, his leadership flowed from prayer. Have you ever felt a deep burden about a problem or a situation? I'm sure we all have at some point felt some type of burden about a situation. It may not even be our own situation, but just one that we're connected to or one that we're aware of. The question really for us is, how did you respond? And I think the broader lesson for me and you today is personal reflection. That's how we begin when we feel burdened by a situation that's going on in our lives, and someone we love, someone we know. We feel led to intervene, to help, to assist in any way, right? I want us to see that godly burdens should drive us to depend on God first, right? Just like Nehemiah did. All right, so that's pillar number 1 of 5. Pillar number 2 is his planning and his permission from Nehemiah chapter 2. So after a long time of praying, Nehemiah finally stands before the king. He's afraid, but he's prepared. He knows exactly what to ask of the king. Letters for safe passage, timber for rebuilding, and time away from his post. He had a plan for when God opened the door. Nehemiah chapter 2 and verse 8 says, "And the king granted them to me according to the good hand," listen to this, "of my God upon me." Let me read that again. "The king granted them to me Not according to his plan, right? Not according to what he had put together. Not even according to his request, but rather according to the good hand, God, of my God upon me. So, what is Nehemiah's planning before approaching the king teach us about faith and preparation? Well, I think it teaches us that faith strengthens our preparation.
Verse 18 says, after they got the permission and everything, the wheels were turning, it says, I told them how the gracious hand of my God had been on me and what the king had said to me. They said, let's start building. And their hands were strengthened to do this work.
Yep.
That was supernatural.
It absolutely was. Nehemiah trusted God first, but he also had a strategic plan, right? We're not saying that, I've heard people say in the past, the misunderstand the idea of faith is, well, how are you going to get that done? You say, I'm going to pray about it, I'm going to leave it in God's hands. Right? That didn't work for Noah, did it? Right? Noah may have trusted in God, but he didn't go, tell me when it's done. Right? He had to trust in God and put a plan together and do what he knew needed to be done. That's the exact same thing that Nehemiah did. He had complete confidence and trust in God. Leaders have to combine prayer with their wise planning. God opens doors for those who are prepared. Prayers without plans are like dreams, right? Plans without prayer, I think I said that wrong. Prayers without plans are dreams, right? Plans without prayer are pride. Does that make sense? I think I messed that. I may have said it wrong the first time, so I'm going to read it again, make sure. Prayers without plans are dreams. Plans without prayer are pride. So Nehemiah shows us what? That leadership involves both seeking God's favor and doing the hard work of preparation. That's something that you and I need to grab hold to. Both elements of that, right? Going to God, as Danny said, going to God early and often, and then putting in the hard work. Another question we have here. If God opened a door for you today, would you be ready? It's interesting. It's kind of a why or why not scenario. If God opened a door for you today, maybe, how about this? If God opened a door for you to share Jesus with somebody, would you be ready? Now, following this premise that we just outlined, hopefully what's happening is we've already been in prayer. We've already been in prayer for God to prepare us, make us ready, make us willing to answer the call, to walk through the door that he's opened. But the other side of that is, am I prepared? Am I ready to give a defense of the hope that I have within me? Am I prepared to share the gospel with someone in a way that is easy to understand and then guides them towards Jesus? I mean, it can be this situation or any situation in our lives. Spiritually speaking, are we prepared if God opened a door for us? So imagine asking your boss for a major promotion. And then he says, well, explain to me why you're qualified for that, and you don't have an answer. You're not prepared for that. I want it, Nehemiah teaches us expect God to answer and be ready to move when he does. And that is huge. In our prayer lives, do we expect God to answer us? Do we have the confidence that he will answer us? Well, I think most of us would, at least on the surface, say, yeah, I do. Well, him answering my prayer is just part of the equation. He said, George, you want to be a more effective for me? There you go. And if I'm not prepared to do what I've asked God to give me the ability to do, if I haven't done the hard work, we got to be ready to move when God moves. Because God will move. God has shown us that over and over and over. But readiness requires constant prayer, constant growth, and preparation so that when those opportunities arise, we're ready. We're ready. All right? Number 3. Let's talk about Nehemiah's inspection and motivation. This comes from chapter 2, verses 11 through 18. So when Nehemiah arrives to the city, this is I love just kind of visualizing this. When he arrived to Jerusalem, he didn't just start barking orders. All right, you go put this over here. We're going to do this. We're ready to go. Although he's already been prayerful about it, he's put a plan together. He's gone to the king. He's gotten all the things that he needs. So now he goes to Jerusalem. He spends 3 nights quietly surveying the city. He wanted to fully understand the problem before he offered a solution. Then he rallied the people with a clear, compelling vision. Chapter 2, verse 17. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lies waste. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem. That's pretty amazing. Why do you think he took time to inspect the walls quietly before revealing his plan to the people?
I saw a statement. It said, good workers know how to get the job done, but the boss knows why. He knows why he's doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's interesting. We're putting a new roof on the high school building, Mobile Christian, this week. And, you know, there are a lot of challenges with that roof. I'll just say that. We've been patching on it for about 20-something years, I guess. I talked to some... Huh?
That goes back to Larry then, don't it?
Oh, well, yeah, he introduced me to that situation. So I was up there yesterday and the day before, mostly on Friday, and I was explaining the situation to my guys, and it just didn't, in their mind, I think somebody said it out loud, that's kind of dumb. Huh, okay. Remember, I'm the guy who's going to pay him at the end of the day, but that's fine. But they didn't understand the big picture of why what I was saying needed to be done first was critical for the success of the work. And once I explained it, then it was like, you know. Nehemiah, he walked around quietly, as the Bible says, because he wanted to get the facts first. He wanted to get a true sense of exactly what needed to be done. He avoided rash decisions, making sure that he fully understood the situation before he kind of explained in general the big picture of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it and how fast we're going to do it. That's an issue that's an issue that's hard to fix in today's society, in today's world. Because in our world, everything happens so fast, right? I've got to get this done in X number of time, and so I can't spend a whole lot of time standing around with my arms folded thinking about it because I've got to get something done. My calendar's full. I got to go from this one to this one to this one. I have X number of things that I need to get accomplished. But a good leader understands that that time of reflection, that time of prayer, that time of preparation, in any walk of life, no matter what you're doing, the time to take a few more minutes, think about it. Be assured of what you're doing. Can save you a lot of heartache. I very often will say, in talking to people about how they respond to something, somebody says something you don't like, we respond like that. I have found, by the way, I have not yet mastered this. I don't know that I'm even close. But I do know that when somebody says something, if somebody says something rash or rude or disrespectful, if I'll take 5 seconds to breathe before I respond. 5, man. I got a bunch of them. If I just take 5 seconds, my mind will automatically, because I'm making a conscious decision to stop first before I say what I want to say or what I'm going to say, that 5 seconds gets my brain in a whole different mindset. It gets me going into, okay, it's in repair mode. Don't say what you thought you were going to. Don't say what you wanted to say. Don't say what you think they deserve to hear. What's the right thing to say? It's amazing that your mind in 5 seconds, most of the time, can fix that. So when we're talking about preparing to do God's work, obviously this is all about a spiritual lesson here. When we're talking about doing things of a spiritual nature, take a little bit of time. If you're preparing to teach a Bible class in here with the kids or whatever, I've always encouraged people, when you put it together and you read it over 16 or 17 times, stop and look at it and think about it and take some time. I've had interesting circumstances in my life through being a youth minister at Central and then being here where people love to call me at like 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning and like, oh, I have the flu, I'm not going to be able to preach, you know. And so, go ahead. So that happened 2 or 3 times at Central. Your daddy, we have stories there. But J.T. Harrison called me one time. I mean, he's preached with pneumonia before. He called me, he couldn't even hardly speak. Well, it's 7:30 in the morning. I got a teen class to teach. So, Danny's daddy always told me that I should always have a sermon in my back pocket. He said, trust me, you're going to need it. And he was right. So I had the sermon in my back pocket, so to speak. And I'm trying to get the kids ready. I still have kids at home. I'm thinking about my lesson with the teenagers and all of that. And I've got to just review this. I've already got it. It's already printed out. And I'm reading it. And I just had to stop for just a minute. And I said, this isn't right. This isn't the right thing for me to preach today. At 7:42 in the morning. There was, I don't know what it was, there was a napkin or something on my nightstand. I don't even know why. And I had some thoughts in it, and I jotted those down. And I just prayed. I said, Lord, okay, I'm not doing this. I got to do something. And I wrote a few notes down. And if you were to ask Samantha today, she would say it was the best sermon I've ever preached. When you stop and give something its time and its consideration and its preparation with whatever time you have, God's going to bless you. It's just reality. Another thing I need to learn in the lesson for today part of this is that effective leaders listen first, speak second. We don't assume, we investigate, right? We're going to gather the facts before we cast a vision based on the truth of the situation. Today's leaders need to diagnose the problems that exist with wisdom and not rush in with assumptions.
Well, I'm sure Larry was the same way, but Daddy always told me, you needed to make sure you put your brain in gear before you start running your mouth.
Yeah.
And I haven't learned that lesson yet, but I'm working on it. But I'm sure Larry would have said the same thing,
For sure.
but that always helps.
Yeah. Yeah, because as Samantha teaches the kids upstairs, it's really, really difficult to put the toothpaste back in the tube, right? But when we think about Nehemiah's inspection, his motivation, he motivated the people by connecting reality of the situation and then hope. Right? You notice what I did here, and it was subconscious, but reality is here, but hope should always be higher. So how can you and I apply that principle today? Question for the class. I'm going to say it again. Nehemiah motivated the people by connecting reality with hope. How do we use that today?
Well, I think Nehemiah was a good leader because he watched out over his people. You know, he was the one that, he had just a small group of people building the walls back, but he had a sword in hand, and he was willing to protect his people. You know, if something were to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good leader. You
Yeah.
know, you got to be ready to protect your employees or your workers or your brothers and sisters. You got to be able to protect them, be ready to protect them whenever you need to.
So how does that equate into the Lord's church?
Well, you got me on that one.
No. I mean, it's something that we don't talk about very often, but it's hammer in one hand, sword in the other.
Right.
That's what Nehemiah had. The leadership of the Lord's church. It's the hammer it's doing the work.
George.
Just a second, let me just finish this sentence and I'm going to come to you. And then it's the sword of the Spirit. Protecting the flock of God from those that would come from the outside and teach things that are contrary to God's word. Yes, ma'am.
Well, we cannot, here we go, we cannot call ourselves Christians and be in the world at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, back in my working days at the airport, I had to deal with people on a daily basis. So you have to make up your mind. You know, do you want to be like them? Or
Yeah.
or are you going to set an example?
Right.
Day by day, because that's what we're supposed to be doing as Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when you work for the public, it's difficult. You know, so do you become like them, or do you being the Christian that we're called to do?
The remarkable thing that I think we constantly need to be reminded of is, you know, in the world, not of the world, we recognize that, but wow, what an extraordinary opportunity that we have to truly reflect Christ. I'm very prayerful that what I'm seeing is what's really happening. I'm seeing more and more of people talking more about God in the mainstream. We took Owen to a movie yesterday called King of Kings. I highly recommend it. It's a cartoon. It doesn't matter. It is extraordinary. And so they, because it's a child's-like movie and it's about the Lord, so the previews are not going to be about horror movies. So they're going to be toned down previews. Well, they're showing all of these movies that are coming out about various topics within the Bible, various stories in the Bible. And it's amazing that all of a sudden, actors that you never heard speak the word of Jesus ever, they're all attaching themselves to these projects. And I just have a sneaking suspicion that there's going to be very soon, there's going to be a clear divide between the absolute evil of Hollywood and those that are at least going to try to keep God in the forefront of their lives. And I'm encouraged by that. I'm prayerful that will happen. Leaders, going back to our story, should acknowledge challenges that you face honestly by always pointing people toward what God can accomplish through faithfulness. Right? In all of this, we always point it back to God. Right? Hey, look, we need to do this. Maybe I'm standing in front of the church and I'm saying, church, we need to do this because God can do this with us in this community. God can accomplish this in our ministries in this city and throughout the world. Right? So we always point people toward what God can accomplish through faithfulness. Abraham Lincoln was famous for visiting battlefields during the Civil War to see the conditions firsthand. Instead of relying on reports solely, he wanted to understand what the reality was. Nehemiah teaches the same lesson. Leaders must see with their own eyes before they speak with authority. Number 4, Nehemiah's endurance against opposition. This is in chapters 4 through 6. The opposition to Nehemiah here essentially came from every direction, right? Mockery, threats, sabotage, rumors. But the great thing that happened in Nehemiah's there is he stayed focused. He refused to leave the wall. He simply said in chapter 6, verse 3, it's interesting, I'm doing a great work, so I cannot come down. How often are we so committed to a work that we know needs to be done that nothing's going to get in the way? We're serving God in this way. We'll not throw an excuse out there. There'll be nothing of a personal or secular nature that will be so important that's going to get it in the way of my service to God in whatever way it is. So how did Nehemiah stay focused despite criticism, threats, and rumors? How could he stay focused with all that going on? What do you think? Could be the same answers we've been saying all class. He focused on God's mission. He prayed constantly. And he refused to be distracted by critics. In your daily life, you have the opportunity to refuse to be distracted by the critics. Because you all have them, don't you? You live next door to them sometimes. You work with them. I hope they're not in your house. I hope you don't worship with them. But you have people in your lives that are going to distract you, want to criticize you, want to divert you away from staying firm in what you know should be done. A preacher once said, if you stop to throw a rock at every barking dog, you'll never get where you're going. Nehemiah teaches us to keep building, keep praying, keep busy, keep leading. You and I, we have to stay on the wall. Nehemiah said, I'm doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Maybe you ask yourself when I ask that question, what is the great work right now that you must stay committed to? Is there a great work? Now, listen, you need to understand that the great work that you may be engaged in, you might not even recognize is a great work. Right? That is not defined by the guy that stands up and teaches the class, or the guy that preaches, or the guy that leads it. It's leadership comes in many different forms. And the fruit of it are shown in many different fashions. The things that you do that reflect Christ in your life on a daily basis, the encouragement that you give, that's a great work.
That's why it's so important that you work in your own family
First.
first.
That's exactly right. Understand and recognize our spiritual priorities. And we have to stay committed to them without distraction. You know, all of us, every leader faces critics. But you know, I've learned over the years that the key is not to engage every enemy. But stay faithful to the mission that God has given me. I hope we understand, and I'm sure you do, that your calling is too great to come down from the wall at every distraction. Number 5. Nehemiah's completion and celebration. This is from chapter 6, verses 15 and 16. Despite all the opposition, the wall was finished in how many days? 52? There are some jobs I can't get a permit for in 52 days. I can't get the materials delivered in 52 days. This was a miraculous achievement. Even the enemies of Israel recognized that this work was done by our God. That's incredible. If you stay on the wall, people that don't even know the Lord can recognize that the great work you're doing was done by your God. Nehemiah, he celebrated that when it was done. And maybe not traditional ways, I guess. If we accomplish something really, you know, if we feel proud of ourselves in something that we do in our lives, how do we normally celebrate it? Right? I'm gonna go on a cruise to celebrate my whatever. We're gonna go out to have a big dinner. We're gonna have a party together. We're gonna celebrate something I've done in this great way. Right? How did Nehemiah celebrate? He worshiped. He offered sacrifices. There was the reading of the law, restoring not just walls, but restoring hearts. Why is it so important for leaders to give God the glory after success?
He deserves it.
Yeah. It's due, right? All victories are by God's hand, not by mine. All I am is the vessel. All I am is the laborer in his vineyard. And when we give God the glory, it fosters in us humility, and it absolutely strengthens our faith.
Well, I think the one thing that we all ought to think about is, you know, if we're given something to do and we accomplish it,
Yep.
it's not time for me to say, you know, I did this, I did, you know.
Prop your feet up, yeah.
Because if it wasn't you, somebody else would have been put in your place,
Mhm.
and they'd accomplished it.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to say, you know, I got this job done for God.
And after the worship, we're not doing sacrifices, but after the reading of the law, what's next, God? What's next?
They need to sacrifice
Yeah,
to God.
yeah. I'm saying we need to say that. After we're done, after we accomplish this, We have a little bit of time of reflection. Hopefully we should magnify and glorify God in that. And when that's done, we don't prop our feet up. We may say a job well done. Then we say, what's next, God?
That experience gives you a great asset in handling the next one.
Man, it sure does. Good leaders celebrate victories. Good leaders share the credit where credit's due. And good leaders magnify the Lord.
And good leaders go back to work.
Yep.
Example. Example.
Being the example. That's exactly right. Nehemiah's leadership rebuilt not just the walls, although it was incredible, but he rebuilt people's faith. In what ways can your leadership help rebuild or strengthen faith in others today? It kind of goes along with the question that I said, what great work are you a part of now? Opportunities to encourage other people, to teach other people, mentoring people. But this last one here, I need to spend a second on living out a godly example. Because if I think about encouraging somebody, if I was going to encourage Lorraine, I'm gonna see her and say something, or I'm gonna pick up my phone and I'm gonna call her. So it is a concerted effort that I'm making for a specific work. If I'm gonna teach in preparation for this class, I had to prepare it, I had to study it, I had to prepare for it, I had intentional movement, intentional action there. If I'm going to be mentoring somebody, that takes a lot of intentional effort. Living out a godly example, though, is something that needs to be a part of my intentional daily breathing in and breathing out. Living the godly example, that living sermon is the greatest thing that we can do to help people. Let them see you can do this. You have tragedy in your life, how you react to it, how you respond in a faithful way, shows people you can be okay. You can survive. Losing a loved one, losing a job, all the things, your health issues, all the calamities that we are faced with, if we approach them with the kind of faith and resilience that God needs us to have, man, we become leaders indeed. Nehemiah's leadership, his journey, it teaches several things. Start with a burden. Pray with passion. Plan with wisdom. Act with courage. Endure with perseverance. Don't forget this one. Finish with worship. If we want to be leaders in our homes, in our churches, our communities, we must learn to lead on our knees and build by faith. I'm confident that God is still looking for Nehemiahs today. People who are willing to stay on that wall. People willing to see brokenness and say, let us rise up and build. I firmly believe that is a culture of sorts that is really, really starting to multiply here at Azalea City. I see it. I can feel it. I sense it. I hear it. My prayers for this congregation is that we continue to be that beacon in this community. There is growing this love for the lost in a way that I have never seen before. And I'm very proud to be a part of this congregation. All of that, though, all of that is to the glory of God. Yes, ma'am.
I walk in this building, and when I walk in the doors, all I feel is love everywhere. This is the most loving church family, and I just appreciate it so much.
Me too. And you know the best, you know the best thing we can do besides continue that is tell somebody about that. Just tell them, just give them a 2-minute blurb on why you are a member of the Lord's church at the Azalea City Church of Christ. And how that fellowship sustains you as you walk with God. People need to know. We can tell them. Thank y'all so much. Appreciate your time.
Sorry, the way you acted about it.